I am Cooper, 62 years old, a retired construction manager who built my business from nothing but calloused hands and determination. For 30 years, I thought I had everything figured out. My son Jackson was my world after my beloved wife Elaine passed. Until that phone call. Dad disgusts me. The words still echo in my mind. What hurts more than your only child thinking you are worthless? 24 hours later, I was gone with $4.2 million, leaving behind only a mysterious box. Before I continue this journey of heartbreak and healing, where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe to hear what family truly means when everything falls apart. My story begins in the rolling hills of rural Pennsylvania, where I grew up watching my parents work themselves to exhaustion just to keep food on our table. Dad worked the same factory job for 40 years, coming home with hands stained black from machine oil and a perpetual ache in his lower back. Mom cleaned houses for the wealthy families across town, returning with stories about marble countertops and swimming pools that seemed like fairy tales to me. We were never poor enough to go hungry, but luxury was a foreign concept in our household. Christmas meant one modest gift and a special dinner. Vacations were day trips to the lake 30 miles away. But despite the financial struggles, there was always love in our home. My parents taught me that hard work and integrity were worth more than any dollar amount. By 17, I was eager to make my own way in the world. College was not an option financially, but I had always been good with my hands and had an eye for how things fit together. I found work with a local construction crew, starting as the guy who carried lumber and cleaned up job sites. The pay was minimal, but the education was priceless. Every day I watched the master carpenters and veteran contractors. I absorbed everything like a sponge. How to read blueprints, the right way to frame a wall, the secret to a perfect finish. When the crew foreman noticed my interest, he took me under his wing, teaching me tricks of the trade that you could not learn from any book. For 7 years, I climbed the ranks from laborer to carpenter to site supervisor. I saved every penny possible living in a tiny apartment with second-hand furniture and driving a truck that was more rust than metal. My goal was always in sight. I wanted my own construction company. At 24, while working on a kitchen renovation in a middle-class neighborhood, I met Elaine. She was the daughter of the homeowners visiting for the weekend from her teaching job in Philadelphia. I still remember the first time I saw her standing in the half-demolished kitchen with a look of amused curiosity. She had these incredible green eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled and wavy auburn hair that caught the sunlight streaming through the windows. "You must be the construction guy my parents cannot stop talking about," she said, extending her hand. "Apparently, you are rebuilding their kitchen and their faith in contractors everywhere." I was covered in drywall dust and probably smelled like sweat and sawdust, but somehow we ended up talking for over an hour. By the time I left that day, I had her phone number scribbled on the back of a paint chip sample. Our courtship was old-fashioned by today's standards. I drove 2 hours to Philadelphia every weekend to see her. We went to movies, walked through city parks, and talked about our dreams. Elaine wanted to become a school principal someday. I shared my plans for starting my own construction business. She never once made me feel like my blue-collar aspirations were less important than her educational career. We married 13 months after we met in a small ceremony in her parents' backyard. The kitchen I had renovated was where we held our modest reception. 2 years later, with Elaine's encouragement and support, I took the biggest risk of my life and started Cooper Construction. The first few years were tough. Sometimes I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake, especially after Jackson was born and I had another mouth to feed. Jackson came into our world on a rainy Tuesday in April. I was in the middle of a difficult commercial job when I got the call that Elaine was in labor. I dropped everything and drove like a madman to the hospital, arriving just in time to hold her hand through the final hour. When they placed that tiny red-faced boy in my arms, I experienced a love so fierce and protective, it almost knocked me over. "He has your eyes," Elaine whispered, exhausted but radiant. "Poor kid," I joked, but secretly I was thrilled to see a piece of myself in this perfect little person. The early years with Jackson were magical. Despite the pressure of growing my business, I made sure to be present in his life. I built him a treehouse in our backyard when he was 5, taught him how to cast a fishing line when he was 7, coached his Little League team for 3 seasons, despite knowing next to nothing about baseball at the start. We established traditions that became the framework of our family life. Sunday brunches were sacred. Elaine would make her famous blueberry pancakes, and we would sit around the table talking about our week. Every summer, we took a 2-week camping trip to different national parks. By the time Jackson was 15, we had visited 12 parks, with Yellowstone being his favorite. When Jackson showed interest in carpentry during his teenage years, I was overjoyed. On weekends, I would take him to job sites and teach him what my old foreman had taught me years before. Together, we built a dining room table that became the centerpiece of our home. Looking back, those were perhaps the happiest days of my life. My business was thriving, my marriage was strong, and my son and I shared a bond that I thought was unbreakable. Elaine was diagnosed with breast cancer when Jackson was in his sophomore year of college. What began as a routine mammogram ended with our world turned upside down. She fought with incredible grace and determination for 3 years. There were periods of remission when we thought the worst was behind us, followed by devastating returns of the disease, each time more aggressive than before. Throughout it all, Jackson was our rock. He transferred to a college closer to home to help care for his mother. I watched my teenage son become a man as he balanced his studies with hospital visits and taking over household duties when I needed to work to maintain our health insurance. We lost Elaine on a quiet Sunday morning. Jackson and I were both at her bedside holding her hands as she took her last breath. The hole her absence left in our lives was immeasurable. For months afterward, Jackson and I moved through our grief together. We would sit at that dining room table we had built and share memories of Elaine, sometimes laughing, sometimes crying, but always connected in our loss. 2 years after Elaine passed, Jackson met Stephanie at a friend's wedding. She was beautiful, intelligent, and ambitious. The daughter of a banking executive, she had grown up in a world very different from our middle-class existence. She had attended private schools, spent summers in Europe, and expected a certain lifestyle that Jackson seemed eager to provide. Their wedding was held at an exclusive country club, with a guest list 3 times the size of the one at our backyard ceremony all those years ago. I felt out of place among Stephanie's family and friends, with their designer clothes and conversations about vacation homes and stock portfolios. But Jackson was happy, and that was all that mattered to me. The first real signs of strain in our relationship appeared after they moved into their new home in an upscale neighborhood called Lakeside Estates. The houses there were massive, with manicured lawns and 3-car garages. Their neighbors were doctors, lawyers, and business executives. When I visited for the first time, bringing a handmade welcome gift, a wooden carving of their new address, I noticed Jackson seemed uncomfortable giving me a tour, hurrying through the rooms, as if afraid I might touch something. "The place looks great, son," I said, trying to bridge the growing awkwardness between us. "Thanks, Dad. It is quite a step up from where I grew up, huh?" he replied with a laugh that held no humor. That comment stung more than he could know. The modest four-bedroom home where Jackson had grown up had been filled with love and hard-earned comforts. I had poured my heart into making it a warm, welcoming place. To hear him dismiss it so casually felt like a rejection of everything Elaine and I had worked for. Still, I tried to stay connected. I invited them for dinner at my place regularly. I offered to help with projects around their new house. I suggested continuing our tradition of Sunday brunches. But increasingly, my invitations were met with excuses about busy schedules and prior commitments. Jackson was changing in other ways, too. He traded his jeans and flannel shirts for designer suits. He leased a luxury car that cost more per month than my first mortgage payment. When we did get together, he talked about client dinners at exclusive restaurants and weekend golf outings with potential investors. The son who had once loved camping and fishing now complained about mosquitoes and seemed bored by my stories about construction projects. I told myself this was natural. He was establishing his own life, creating his own identity separate from his upbringing. And after all, was that not what every parent wanted, for their child to exceed their own achievements? But deep down, I could not shake the feeling that Jackson was not just moving up in the world. He was leaving me behind. After Elaine passed, our family home felt cavernous and empty. I would walk from room to room, surrounded by memories that brought both comfort and pain. The kitchen where she had danced while making dinner. The living room where we had watched countless movies together. The garden she had lovingly tended each spring. Sometimes I would catch myself talking to her, asking what she would think of how things were changing with Jackson. At 60, I made the decision to retire and sell Cooper Construction. The business had grown beyond my wildest dreams with a staff of 50 and projects across 3 states. A larger regional company had been eyeing us for acquisition for several years, and their offer was generous. After taxes and setting aside money for retirement, I found myself with a substantial sum just over $4 million. More money than I had ever imagined having, yet it brought little joy. What was the point of financial security when the people you wanted to share it with were either gone or drifting away? My attempts to connect with Jackson grew increasingly strained. Our phone conversations became shorter and more superficial. When I asked about his work or marriage, he gave brief, non-committal answers before changing the subject. When I shared stories about my day or memories of Elaine, I could almost hear his impatience through the phone. 2 years into his marriage with Stephanie, they announced they were expecting twins. I was overjoyed at the prospect of becoming a grandfather. During Stephanie's pregnancy, there seemed to be a brief warming in our relationship. Jackson called more often, seeking advice about preparing for parenthood. I allowed myself to hope that the arrival of children might bridge the growing gap between us. The twins, a boy named Alexander and a girl named Lily, were born healthy and beautiful. I was at the hospital the day they came home, my truck filled with gifts. I had spent months crafting matching wooden cradles, carving their names and birth dates into the headboards. I had also restored the rocking chair that had been in my family for generations, the same one Elaine had used to rock Jackson to sleep. Stephanie barely glanced at the cradles, thanking me with a tight smile before mentioning they had already purchased designer cribs that matched their nursery theme. The rocking chair was relegated to a guest room deemed too rustic for their main living spaces. Still, I was determined to be an involved grandfather. I offered to babysit to help with midnight feedings to give the exhausted new parents a break. "Thanks, Dad, but we have a night nurse," Jackson explained. "And Stephanie's mother is staying with us for the first few months." As the twins grew, my access to them became increasingly limited. I was invited to their first birthday party, a lavish affair with a professional photographer, catered food, and gift bags for the guests that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. I sat awkwardly at a table with distant relatives of Stephanie's, nursing a glass of champagne and watching my grandchildren from afar. When I finally got a chance to hold Alexander, I noticed how he stared at my weathered hands with fascination. I made a silly face and he burst into peals of laughter that drew attention from across the room. Stephanie quickly appeared, taking him from my arms. "It is time for their nap," she explained, though the party was still in full swing. The twins were enrolled in an exclusive private preschool at age 3, despite my gentle suggestion that they seemed young for formal education. Lakeside Academy was known for its rigorous early childhood curriculum and its role as a feeder school for the most prestigious kindergarten programs in the area. "We had to pull strings to get them in," Jackson boasted during a rare family dinner at their home. "There is a 2-year waiting list, but one of Stephanie's clients sits on the board." "What do they learn there?" I asked, genuinely curious. "They are only 3. Stephanie launched into an explanation about early cognitive development, second language acquisition, and socialization with peers of similar background and potential. I nodded politely, though I could not help thinking about how Jackson had thrived in the public school system and the simple joys of his early childhood, spent mostly playing in our backyard. Invitations to family events became increasingly rare. I missed Alexander's first soccer game because I was not told about it until after it happened. I learned about Lily's dance recital through photos posted on social media. When I called to express my disappointment at being excluded, Jackson sounded genuinely surprised. "Sorry, Dad. I thought Stephanie told you. We have been so busy." One particularly painful memory stands out from this period. I was invited to Jackson's birthday dinner at an upscale restaurant downtown. I spent hours shopping for a new shirt and tie, wanting to fit in with the crowd I knew would be there. I even watched YouTube videos on fine dining etiquette, worried about using the wrong fork or committing some social faux pas that would embarrass my son. The evening was a study in isolation. I sat at a table surrounded by Jackson's colleagues and friends, unable to contribute to conversations about European vacation spots I had never visited or private schools I could not afford. When I tried to share a funny story about Jackson's childhood camping adventures, Stephanie smoothly interrupted to redirect the conversation. Later that night, as guests mingled after dinner, I overheard a conversation that cut me to the core. Standing near the restrooms out of sight, but within earshot, I heard Stephanie speaking to a friend. "Jackson has come so far from his background," she was saying. "You would never know his father is just a construction worker. Those blue-collar manners are so deeply ingrained, though. Did you see him use his salad fork for the entree?" Her friend laughed, and I felt my face burn with shame. I slipped away before they could see me making an excuse about an early morning the next day, before saying my goodbyes. At home, I stood before the mirror, seeing myself through their eyes for the first time. My suit, though new, was clearly not the quality of those worn by the other men at dinner. My haircut was functional rather than stylish. My hands, despite years of management rather than physical labor, still bore the calluses and small scars of someone who had worked with tools most of his life. I began making conscious efforts to bridge the divide. I bought books on topics I heard mentioned at their dinner parties. I watched documentaries about art and architecture. I even took a wine appreciation class at the local community college. But the more I tried to fit into their world, the more awkward and inauthentic I felt. The truth I was avoiding became increasingly clear. Despite all my financial success, despite building a company that employed dozens of people and completing projects that changed the skyline of our city in the eyes of my son and his wife, I was an embarrassment. A reminder of humble origins they were trying to escape. The realization was a crushing weight that pushed me into a depression I hid from everyone. Each night, I would sit alone in the house that once echoed with family laughter, looking at photographs of happier times and wondering where I had gone wrong. Had I not given Jackson everything I could, had I not supported his dreams, celebrated his successes, been there through the darkest days of his mother's illness, was that not enough to earn his respect, if not his gratitude? The financial security I had worked so hard to achieve now seemed hollow. What good was money in the bank when the people you wanted to share it with saw you as beneath them? I began to question every decision I had made, every sacrifice, every long day at work that had taken me away from home. Had it all been for nothing? The event that finally shattered our already fragile relationship began innocently enough. While reading the local business journal, I came across an article about financial troubles at Lakeside Academy, the prestigious preschool my grandchildren attended. The school had lost a major donor, and there was concern they might need to cut programs or raise tuition significantly. Knowing how much the twins loved their school, particularly the advanced music program that Lily had shown talent in, I saw an opportunity to help without overstepping. I contacted the school administration and arranged to make an anonymous donation of $250,000, enough to cover the shortfall and ensure the programs would continue uninterrupted. The only condition was that my identity as the donor remain confidential. I wanted to help not draw attention to myself or make Jackson uncomfortable. For several weeks, everything seemed fine. I took quiet satisfaction in hearing from Jackson, during one of our infrequent calls, that the school had been saved by a mysterious benefactor and that Lily would be able to continue her beloved violin lessons. It felt good to be able to contribute positively to my grandchildren's lives, even if from a distance. Then came the school's annual Parents' Appreciation Gala. Though I was not invited, I later pieced together what happened from the explosive phone call that followed. Apparently, the school board chairman had too much champagne and let slip the identity of their anonymous savior during his speech. And a special thanks to Mr. Cooper Bennett, grandfather, to two of our brightest students, whose extraordinary generosity has ensured our financial stability for years to come. My phone rang at 9:30 that evening. When I answered, Jackson's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "What the hell were you thinking?" he demanded without preamble. "Jackson." "What is wrong?" I asked, genuinely confused. "You had no right to interfere with the school, no right to embarrass us like that." I tried to explain my intentions, how I had specifically requested anonymity, how I only wanted to help preserve something important to the twins. But Jackson was beyond listening. "Dad disgusts me," he shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. "Do you have any idea what position you have put us in? Rasa now thinks we needed your financial bailout. Do you know how that looks?" The word disgusts hit me like a physical blow. My own son. The little boy I had taught to ride a bike, the teenager I had comforted through his first heartbreak, the young man whose hand I had held as we said goodbye to his mother. Disgusted by me. "I was just trying to help," I said quietly. "We do not need your help," he fired back. "We do not need you showing up at school functions in your work boots and flannel shirts, embarrassing the kids with your unsophisticated talk. We do not need you trying to buy your way into our social circle." Each word was a knife twisting deeper. I sat down heavily, my legs suddenly unable to support me. "The twins love me," I managed to say, grasping at the one relationship I thought was untainted. "They are children. They do not know any better yet. But they will, and I do not want them growing up thinking your blue-collar values are something to aspire to." The world has changed, Dad. Your world, your ways, they are outdated. We are trying to give our children advantages you could never understand. The conversation deteriorated further. Jackson informed me that I was no longer welcome at the twins' birthday party the following weekend. That Stephanie was mortified by the school incident. That perhaps we should take a break from family gatherings until I learned to respect their boundaries. When the call finally ended, I sat in stunned silence, the phone still clutched in my hand. The house around me seemed to close in the walls, bearing witness to a pain I had never imagined possible. The rejection was complete and devastating, not just of my help, but of me, of everything I was and had ever been. I did not sleep that night. Instead, I paced the floors of my home, reliving moments from Jackson's childhood, searching for the point where I had failed him. Was it working too many hours when he was young? Not pushing him hard enough academically? Raising him with values that the world no longer respected, by dawn exhausted and emotionally raw? I stood at my kitchen window, watching the sunrise, and something shifted inside me. A lifetime of putting others first, of measuring my worth through their eyes, suddenly seemed like a terrible mistake. I had given my son everything, including the tools to build a life that apparently had no place for me in it. And in doing so, I had forgotten to value myself. The realization was both painful and liberating. For the first time in years, maybe decades, I asked myself what I wanted. Not what would make Jackson happy or what Elaine would have expected, but what would bring me peace. And with that question came the first glimmer of a plan. The morning after that devastating phone call, I contacted my financial advisor, Martin. We had worked together for 15 years, and he had helped me manage the proceeds from the sale of my construction company. I requested an urgent meeting, and to his credit, he rearranged his schedule to see me that afternoon. "Cooper, you look terrible," he said, as I entered his office. "Are you okay?" I gave him a brief sanitized version of the situation with Jackson, explaining that I needed to make some significant financial decisions. "I need to know exactly where I stand," I told him. "Total assets, liquidity, everything." Martin pulled up my financial portfolio on his computer. "You are in an excellent position," he explained. "The sale of your business netted you just over $3.8 million after taxes. Your investments have performed well, adding another $400,000. The house is fully paid off and worth approximately $600,000 in the current market. So all told, you are sitting on assets of about $4.8 million. And if I wanted to liquidate everything, the house, the investments, all of it," Martin looked concerned, "that would be about $4.2 million in cash after taxes and fees. But Cooper, making financial decisions during emotional crises is rarely advisable. Perhaps we should discuss this again in a few weeks when things have settled." I appreciated his caution, but my mind was made up. "I have given this more thought than you know," I assured him. "I need a change, Martin, a complete break." From Martin's office, I went directly to see my lawyer, Harold Greenberg. Harold and I had a relationship dating back to the founding of my construction company. He had handled my contracts, my divorce, and Elaine's estate. "I need to update my will," I told him after we exchanged pleasantries. "And I need to set up some very specific arrangements." Over the next 2 hours, we drafted a new will that reflected my changed circumstances and intentions. I established a modest educational trust for the twins that would become available to them when they turned 18, regardless of my relationship with their parents. The rest of my estate would be divided among several charities that had been important to Elaine, particularly those focused on cancer research and support for families affected by the disease. "And I need one more thing," I told Harold as we finished the paperwork. "I need you to be the executor of something immediately, not after my death." I explained my plan to leave town indefinitely and asked him to handle the delivery of a package to Jackson 1 week after my departure, along with a letter explaining my decision. "Are you sure about this, Cooper?" Harold asked, concern evident in his voice. "This seems very sudden." "Nothing about this is sudden," I replied. "It has been building for years. I just finally have the clarity to see it." My next stop was to visit my oldest friend, Anthony. We had met in that first construction crew when I was 17, and he had been my business partner until his retirement 5 years earlier. Anthony was the closest thing to family I had left. The only person who knew me before I was a husband, father, or business owner. We sat on his back porch drinking beer and watching the sunset as I unloaded the whole story. Unlike Martin and Harold, Anthony did not question my decision or suggest I reconsider. He just listened occasionally, nodding until I had talked myself out. "You have earned the right to live for yourself now, Coop," he said finally. "You spent your whole life taking care of others. First your parents, then Elaine and Jackson, then all the employees at the company. When was the last time you did something just because you wanted to?" I could not remember which was answer enough. "So what is the plan?" he asked. "Where will you go?" "I do not know yet," I admitted. "Somewhere new, somewhere without memories. I thought maybe I would just drive for a while, see the country, figure it out as I go." Anthony nodded approvingly. "Elaine would want that for you. She always said you worked too hard, worried too much about providing. She would kick your ass if she knew you were sitting around being treated like this by Jackson." The mention of Elaine brought both pain and clarity. He was right. She had always encouraged me to enjoy life more, to worry less about security and status. Over the next 3 days, I set my plan in motion. I contacted a realtor and listed my house for sale, specifying that I wanted a quick closing and was willing to accept a slightly below-market price to facilitate it. In a stroke of luck, a young couple expecting their first child fell in love with the family-friendly neighborhood and the spacious backyard. They offered cash with a 30-day closing period. I began the difficult process of sorting through a lifetime of possessions. Some items were easy to part with. Furniture, kitchen appliances, lawn equipment, all sold or donated without much emotional attachment. Others required more thought. Photographs of Jackson growing up, the dining room table we had built together, Elaine's collection of ceramic birds that she had curated over decades. In the end, I decided to keep only what would fit in my truck and a small storage unit. The most precious photos and mementos, a few tools with sentimental value, clothes, and personal items I would need on my journey. Everything else would go sold or given away to people who might appreciate them. The most important task was creating the box for Jackson. I chose a cedar chest that Elaine and I had purchased on our 10th anniversary trip to Vermont. Inside, I carefully placed items I thought might someday have meaning for him or the twins. The family photo albums chronologically arranged and labeled. My father's pocket watch that had been passed down to me. Wooden toys I had crafted for Jackson as a child, and newer ones I had made for the twins, but never had the chance to give them. A handwritten recipe book of all Elaine's favorite meals compiled during the last year of her life when cooking became too difficult for her. A flash drive containing digitized home videos from Jackson's childhood that I had recently converted from old VHS tapes. And finally, a letter. I spent an entire evening writing it, tearing up draft after draft, until I found the words that expressed my feelings without bitterness or recrimination. Dear Jackson, by the time you read this, I will be gone. Not in the permanent sense, but I have left town and our old life behind. I want you to know that this decision comes after much reflection and with both sadness and hope. The truth is, I have finally recognized that I cannot be the father you need or want at this stage of your life. The values and background that shaped me seem to be a source of embarrassment for you now, and I cannot change who I am at this point in my life, nor do I want to. I want you to know that despite everything, I am proud of you. You have built a successful career and a beautiful family. You have provided your children with opportunities I could never have imagined. That is what every parent hopes for, that their child will exceed their own achievements. I have established a trust for Alexander and Lily's education. It is modest, but should help with college expenses when the time comes. Harold Greenberg has the details and will contact you when they turn 18. This is not an attempt to interfere in your lives, but simply a grandfather's desire to contribute to his grandchildren's future. I do not know if our paths will cross again. That will depend on many things, including whether you feel my presence adds value to your life. Know that you are loved, Jackson. Always have been, always will be, regardless of our differences and the pain between us. I hope someday you will look at the items in this box and remember that you come from a line of people who worked hard, loved deeply, and valued integrity above status. Those are not outdated values, son. They are the foundation upon which all worthwhile lives are built. With love, Dad. I sealed the letter and placed it on top of the other items in the chest, then closed the lid. Harold would arrange for its delivery 1 week after my departure, giving me time to be well away before Jackson discovered I was gone. On my last night in the house, I checked into a hotel. I could not bear to sleep surrounded by empty rooms and bare walls. As I lay in the anonymous hotel bed, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Fear about the uncertain future ahead, sadness at the relationships I was leaving behind, but also, surprisingly, a sense of excitement. For the first time in decades, I was answerable only to myself. The freedom was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The morning of my departure dawned clear and cool, a perfect early autumn day. I had arranged for the moving company to take the few boxes I was keeping to a storage facility later that week. My truck was packed with just the essentials, a small suitcase of clothes, some personal items, and a road map of the United States, with no particular destination marked. I took one last drive through the town that had been my home for over 40 years, past the high school where Jackson had graduated, past the hospital where both he and Elaine had been patients, past the first office of Cooper Construction, now a trendy coffee shop. Each landmark held memories that were both precious and painful. My final stop was the cemetery where Elaine was buried. I parked near her grave and walked the familiar path carrying a small bouquet of daisies, her favorite. The headstone was simple, just as she had wanted. Elaine Marie Bennett, beloved wife and mother, followed by the dates that bracketed her too short life and the quote she had chosen. Love remains. I sat on the small bench I had installed nearby and spoke to her as I often did, explaining my decision, seeking her understanding, if not her approval. I think you would tell me it is time to find some peace, I said softly. To stop measuring my worth through Jackson's eyes. I wish you were here to help bridge the gap between us, but maybe this separation is necessary. Maybe we all need space to figure out who we are and what we value. I stayed for nearly an hour, reminiscing about our life together, seeking strength from her memory for the journey ahead. As I finally stood to leave, I touched the headstone one last time. I will always love you, I promised. Wherever I go, whatever happens next. The hardest part of my plan was not telling Jackson I was leaving. Part of me wanted a final confrontation, a chance to make him understand the pain his rejection had caused. but I knew such a conversation would likely end badly, with words spoken that could never be taken back. Better to let the letter explain my feelings once I was gone. I had arranged for the cedar chest to be delivered to Jackson's home exactly 1 week after my departure. I had chosen a courier service that specialized in handling valuable items and required a signature upon delivery. I wanted to be certain the box reached Jackson personally, not left on a doorstep or given to a neighbor. Unable to resist one last glimpse of the family I was leaving behind, I parked down the street from Jackson's house that afternoon. I told myself I was just confirming the address for the courier service, but the truth was I needed this final memory to carry with me. Fortune favored me. As I sat in my truck, trying to be inconspicuous, the front door opened and the twins ran out into the yard, followed by their nanny. They were playing some kind of chasing game, their laughter carrying across the quiet street. Alexander was wearing a superhero cape, while Lily had a plastic tiara perched on her dark curls. They looked so much like Jackson at that age that it made my heart ache. The same earnest expressions when concentrating. The same uninhibited joy when playing. Would they remember me at all as they grew older? Would Jackson tell them stories about their grandmother, about their family history, or would that all be erased, replaced with narratives that better fit their new social position? I watched until they were called inside for lunch, memorizing their faces, the sound of their voices, the way Alexander protected his sister even in play. Then I drove away, tears blurring my vision, knowing I had made the right decision, but feeling the cost of it deep in my soul. As I hit the interstate heading west, I thought about the contents of the cedar chest that would soon be delivered. The photos spanning generations showing a family that had overcome hardships and celebrated joys together. The handcrafted toys representing hours of loving labor. The recipe book preserving Elaine's legacy of nurturing through food. But most importantly, the letter. I had been careful to express my hurt without accusation, my love without condition. I explained that I had not included my new contact information or destination because I needed time and space to heal, but that Harold had a way to reach me in case of emergency. I made it clear that this was not about punishment, but self-preservation. The letter also contained information about the educational trust I had established for the twins, $50,000 each to be held until they turned 18. Not enough to fully fund college at the prestigious institutions Jackson would likely prefer, but a meaningful contribution nonetheless. I wanted them to know someday that their grandfather had thought of their future, even when excluded from their present. With each mile that passed beneath my wheels, I felt a gradual lightening of the burden I had carried for so long. The need to please, to be accepted, to conform to expectations, not my own, began to recede. In its place grew a tentative sense of possibility. Who would I become without the weight of Jackson's disapproval? What might life hold for a man with no obligations, but to himself? I turned off my phone as I crossed the state line, symbolically cutting the last tether to my old life. Ahead lay the open road and a future unwritten. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt the stirring of genuine hopes. The first months of my self-imposed exile were a revelation. I had never traveled extensively, always too busy building my business and raising my family. Now, with no schedule to keep and no one expecting me anywhere, I indulged my curiosity and wanderlust. I drove the Pacific Coast Highway, marveling at the ocean views. I spent a week in the Grand Canyon hiking trails and sitting in contemplative silence at sunrise. I visited small towns and big cities, staying as long as a place held my interest. Throughout this period, I maintained radio silence with my old life. Harold was under strict instructions to contact me only in case of true emergency. I checked my email sporadically from library computers, but there were never messages from Jackson. I did not know if he was respecting my wishes for space or simply relieved to have me out of his life. The uncertainty was painful but necessary for my healing process. 3 months into my journey, I found myself in a small coastal town in Oregon called Seacliff. Something about the place called to me immediately. Perhaps it was the dramatic coastline, with its rocky outcroppings and misty mornings, or the small, close-knit community where locals greeted each other by name in the single grocery store. Or maybe it was simply that it bore no resemblance whatsoever to the suburban Pennsylvania landscape where I had spent most of my life. I rented a modest cabin a short walk from the beach, telling myself it was just for a few weeks. The cabin was rustic, but solid, with a stone fireplace and a covered porch facing the ocean. The elderly owner, Mrs. Peterson, seemed pleased to have a long-term tenant in the off-season and charged me a reasonable monthly rate. "Been empty since Labor Day," she explained as she handed over the keys. "Most folks only want it in the summer. But winter is when the coast really shows its character. The storms coming in off the Pacific will take your breath away." She was right. The winter storms were spectacular, with massive waves crashing against the shore and wind that howled around the eaves of the cabin. I would sit on the covered porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching nature's fury unleashed, finding a strange comfort in the reminder of how small human concerns were in the grand scheme of things. It was during one such storm that I met Frank, a 70-year-old retired fisherman who lived in the cabin nearest to mine. He showed up at my door with an extra flashlight and some batteries, correctly guessing that a newcomer might not be prepared for the frequent power outages that accompanied coastal storms. "Figured you might need these," he said gruffly. "First winter here." When I nodded, he invited himself in and proceeded to give me a crash course in coastal storm survival. "Always keep water stored. Have a camp stove for coffee when the power goes out. Know which neighbors have generators and might let you charge your phone." That impromptu storm preparation lesson turned into a friendship that would become central to my new life. Frank was a lifelong Seacliff resident who knew everyone and everything about the town. A widower for 15 years, he had the gruff exterior and heart of gold that seemed to characterize many of the men who had made their living from the sea. "What brings you to our little corner of nowhere?" he asked one evening as we sat on my porch watching the sunset, a ritual that had become our habit. I gave him the abbreviated version of my story, leaving out the more painful details. Just a retired construction company owner looking for a change of scenery after his wife's death. Frank seemed to sense there was more to it, but did not press. Instead, he told me about a problem he was having with his deck, which was rotting in several places and becoming dangerous. "Been meaning to fix it, but these old hands are not what they used to be," he admitted, flexing fingers gnarled by decades of hard work and arthritis. I could take a look. I offered, grateful for the chance to use my skills again. I might be retired, but I still remember which end of a hammer to hold. The deck repair took 3 days and gave me more satisfaction than anything I had done in months. There was something deeply therapeutic about working with my hands. Again, measuring and cutting lumber, driving nails, seeing a tangible result from my labor. When we christened the finished project with beers on the new deck, Frank studied me with newfound respect. "You are pretty handy for a retiree," he observed. "Shame to let those skills go to waste." Word spread quickly in the small community about the new guy who could fix things. Soon I found myself fielding requests from Frank's friends and neighbors. A sagging gate that needed to be rehung, cabinet doors that stuck after the damp winter, a leak in the roof of the community center where children's programs were held. I never charged for these small repairs, considering them a way to be useful and to integrate into the community. But the gratitude I received was payment enough. For the first time in years, I felt valued for who I was and what I could contribute, not judged for what I lacked. As winter gave way to spring, I made a decision that surprised even me. I went to see Mrs. Peterson and asked if she would consider selling me the cabin. "Never thought I would part with it," she admitted. "It was my Walter's pride and joy. But at my age, the upkeep is becoming too much, and I like the idea of someone living there who appreciates the place." We agreed on a fair price, and just like that, I became a homeowner again. The cabin needed work, lots of it. The plumbing was outdated, the kitchen was straight out of the 1970s, and the roof would need replacing before another winter. But as I looked around at what would become my new home, I felt a sense of purpose returning. I hired local tradespeople for the major systems work, but did much of the renovation myself. The physical labor was exhausting but satisfying. Each evening after a day of work, I would sit on the porch with an aching back and scraped knuckles watching the ocean and feeling more at peace than I had in years. Frank stopped by often to supervise, which mainly involved drinking beer and telling stories about the town's history. Through him, I met other locals and slowly built a small circle of friends. There was Margaret, the librarian, who saved interesting books she thought I might enjoy. Tom and Sarah, who owned the bakery in town and would set aside sourdough bread for me on baking days. Deputy Hayes, who warned residents about incoming storms and road closures. None of them knew or cared about my net worth, my educational background, or my social status. They valued reliability, honesty, and willingness to help when needed. The very qualities that had seemed insufficient in Jackson's world were currency in Seacliff. 6 months after arriving in town, I was physically and emotionally healthier than I had been in years. The physical work and coastal walks had trimmed my waistline and improved my endurance. The simple rhythms of small-town life had reduced my stress, and the acceptance I found among my new friends had begun to heal the wounds left by Jackson's rejection. One day, while replacing rotted boards on the community center porch, I was approached by the director, an energetic woman named Diana, who ran the town's limited youth programs. "We have a small woodworking class for teenagers," she explained. "But our instructor moved away last month. Frank tells me you are quite skilled. Any interest in taking it over?" My initial instinct was to decline. The thought of working with teenagers was intimidating, particularly given my strained relationship with my own son. But something made me reconsider. "I could give it a try," I said cautiously. "When does it meet?" The class consisted of 6 teenagers, mostly boys with behavioral issues or difficult home situations. They were suspicious of me at first, testing boundaries and challenging my authority. But when I demonstrated how to use the lathe to turn a simple wooden bowl, their attitudes began to shift. "That is actually kind of cool," admitted Tyler, the most resistant of the group. "Could we learn to make stuff like that?" Over the following weeks, I taught them basic woodworking skills, emphasizing safety and patience. We started with simple projects: birdhouses, cutting boards, picture frames. With each completed project, their confidence grew. So did mine. These kids responded to the same approach that had worked with my construction crews years ago. Clear expectations, respect for their efforts, recognition of improvement, and perhaps most importantly, treating mistakes as learning opportunities rather than failures. One afternoon, as we were cleaning up after class, Tyler lingered behind the others. "My dad left when I was 8, he said abruptly, focusing intently on sweeping sawdust. "He said he would visit, but never did." I was not sure how to respond, but Tyler continued before I could formulate a reply. "My mom's boyfriend is a jerk, says I will never amount to anything. He gestured to the bookshelf he had completed that day. But I made that. It is actually good, right? It is excellent work, I told him truthfully. You have real talent, Tyler. He nodded, seemingly satisfied, and left without another word. But the following week he arrived early to class, eager to start a new project. That brief exchange made me realize that while I could not fix my relationship with Jackson, at least not yet, I could still make a difference in the lives of these young people who needed someone to believe in them. As summer approached, I made a significant decision. I would use some of my savings to open a small woodworking shop in town, not with the goal of building another business empire, but to create a space where I could work on custom furniture projects and potentially expand the youth program. I found a suitable building, a former boat repair shop with good natural light and high ceilings. The renovation took 2 months, during which I was fortunate to have help from Frank and several of my teenage students who were eager to earn summer money. By August, Cooper's Custom Woodworks was open for business. I kept it intentionally small, accepting only projects that interested me and limiting my working hours to leave time for teaching and enjoying my new community. The business was not about making money. It was about continuing to use the skills that gave me satisfaction while creating opportunities for the young people I had come to care about. The first Christmas season away from Jackson and the twins was difficult. Memories of past family celebrations haunted me. I found myself wondering if Alexander and Lily liked the presents I had sent through Harold, if they asked about me, if Jackson ever looked at the contents of the cedar chest. Frank sensed my melancholy and insisted I join him and several other town orphans for Christmas dinner. It was nothing like the elaborate holiday meals Elaine used to prepare, just simple food and conversation among people who had nowhere else to go. Yet somehow, it was exactly what I needed. After dinner, Harold called the first contact I had allowed since leaving. He informed me that Jackson had been asking about me, trying to get my new contact information. He seems genuinely concerned, Cooper, Harold said. Maybe it is time to reach out. I thanked him for the information, but explained that I was not ready yet. The wounds were still too fresh, the fear of rejection too strong. I needed more time to solidify the new identity I was building, one not dependent on Jackson's approval. Tell him I am well, I instructed Harold. That is all for now. As I hung up, I realized something important. For the first time since that devastating phone call, I was considering the possibility of reconciliation from a position of strength, not desperation. I no longer needed Jackson's acceptance to feel worthwhile. I had built a life with meaning and purpose. Whether he chose to be part of it would be his decision, but it would no longer define my value. 1 year after my departure, almost to the day, I received an email from Jackson. Harold had finally provided my email address at my request, feeling that enough time had passed for both of us. The message was short, but hit me like a physical force. Dad, I have been trying to find you for months. Harold finally agreed to forward this email. I do not know if you will read it or respond, but I need to try. I read your letter many times. At first I was angry that you had left without saying goodbye. Then I felt abandoned. Finally, I began to understand. The box you left has become important to me. I look at the photos of our family, of Mom, of the life we had before everything changed. I realized how much I have lost in pursuing what I thought I wanted. The twins ask about you. They remember their grandpa who made them laugh. Lily sleeps with the wooden doll you carved for her that was in the box. I am sorry, Dad. So deeply sorry for the pain I caused you. The things I said that night were unforgivable. I was caught up in a world that values the wrong things, and I let it change me. If you are willing, I would like to talk. Just a phone call or video chat. No pressure for more than that. Your son, Jackson, I read the email a dozen times, emotions washing over me in waves. Relief that he was reaching out. Caution born from past hurt. Hope that perhaps there was a path forward. Fear that opening myself to reconciliation meant risking further rejection. After careful consideration, I composed a reply that was honest but measured. Jackson. Thank you for your email. It means more than I can express to hear from you, especially to know that the twins remember me. I would be open to a video call, perhaps this Sunday at 7 p.m. your time. That would give us both a few days to prepare. I want you to know that I have built a new life here. I am not the same person who left a year ago. I have found purpose and community that values me for who I am. I hope we can find a way forward that respects who we both have become. Dad. The days until Sunday passed with agonizing slowness. I found myself rehearsing what I would say, then reminding myself to be authentic rather than scripted. When the appointed hour finally arrived, I sat at my computer with a racing heart, wondering if he would actually call. The video chat request came through exactly on time. I took a deep breath and accepted it. Jackson's face filled my screen, older somehow than I remembered, with new lines around his eyes. Dad, he said simply, his voice catching. It is really good to see you. You too, son, I replied, surprised by the emotion in my own voice. The first few minutes were awkward. We exchanged pleasantries, commented on each other's appearance, circled around the deeper issues that needed addressing. Finally, Jackson took a deep breath. I need to apologize properly, he said. What I said to you that night about being disgusted, it was cruel and untrue. I was caught up in trying to impress people who were never worth it. After you left, I started to see how shallow it all was. How I had traded real relationships for status. What happened? I asked, genuinely curious about the change in his perspective. Many things, he admitted. But it started with the box. Seeing all those photographs, reading Mom's recipes, watching those old videos of us building things together. I remembered who I was before all this, who we were as a family. He went on to explain that Stephanie had initially been angry about my departure, seeing it as another embarrassment. But the twins had asked for me constantly, especially after finding the wooden toys I had included for them. They loved those toys more than all the expensive electronic gifts they had, Jackson said with a rueful smile. Lily carries that wooden bird everywhere. Says Grandpa made it special for her. As our conversation continued, Jackson revealed that he and Stephanie had been in counseling, working through issues in their marriage that went far beyond my departure. They had both realized that the social climbing and status seeking was making them miserable and affecting their relationship with the twins. We took them out of Lakeside Academy. He told me a decision that would have been unthinkable a year ago. They are in a good public school now, one with more diversity and less pressure. They are much happier. I shared stories of my new life in Seacliff, the cabin renovation, the woodworking shop, the teenagers I was teaching. With each exchange, the tension eased, replaced by a tentative warmth. Would it be possible, Jackson asked hesitantly, toward the end of our call for us to visit you? Maybe during the twins' spring break, they would love to see where Grandpa lives now. The request caught me off guard. I had imagined eventually visiting them, perhaps meeting on neutral territory. The idea of them coming to my new world, seeing the life I had built without them, was both thrilling and terrifying. I would like that, I said after a moment's consideration. It is not fancy here. My cabin is small, but there is a decent hotel in town if you would be more comfortable. "We would love to see your home," Jackson assured me, "if you are willing to have us." We made tentative plans for their visit in April, 3 months away. It would give us time to continue rebuilding our relationship through calls and emails, and for me to prepare emotionally for their arrival. After we disconnected, I sat staring at the blank screen trying to process everything that had happened. There was a part of me that feared this was too good to be true, that Jackson's change of heart would prove temporary or conditional. But there was also profound gratitude that we had this chance at reconciliation, something I had nearly given up hoping for. When April arrived, bringing with it spring rains and wildflowers along the coastal trails, I found myself cleaning and preparing the cabin with nervous energy. I had added a small guest room during my renovations, just enough space for the twins with a pull-out sofa in the living room for Jackson and Stephanie. I stocked the refrigerator with family-friendly foods and set up a small workbench where I could teach the twins basic woodworking skills if they were interested. The day of their arrival dawned clear and mild. I stood in the small Seacliff airport watching anxiously as passengers deplaned from the Portland connecting flight. And then they were there and Alexander running ahead of the others, launching himself into my arms with a force that nearly knocked me over. "Grandpa, we found you," he exclaimed as if I had been playing an extended game of hide-and-seek. Lily approached more cautiously, clutching the wooden bird I had carved. But when I knelt to her level, she threw her arms around my neck and whispered, "I kept your bird safe." Jackson and Stephanie followed, looking both nervous and hopeful. Stephanie, whom I had expected to be cold or distant, surprised me by embracing me warmly. "Thank you for giving us this chance," she said quietly. "We have a lot to make up for." The visit was not without awkward moments. We were all hyper-aware of past hurts, careful with our words, sometimes too polite. But there were also breakthroughs. The twins were delighted with my simple cabin and fascinated by the ocean, visible from the porch. They collected shells, built sandcastles, and squealed with joy when Frank took us all out on his small boat to see seals basking on the rocks. Jackson seemed genuinely interested in my woodworking shop and the program for teenagers. He spent an afternoon helping me with a project, our hands working in tandem, as they had when he was young. We did not discuss the past directly, but in that shared activity there was a kind of healing. The most surprising development was Stephanie. Removed from the pressure of her social circle, she revealed a warmth and humor I had never seen before. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, she addressed the elephant in the room. "I owe you an apology," she said directly. "I was the one who pushed Jackson to distance himself from you. I was so obsessed with projecting the right image, with being accepted by people who never really cared about us." "What changed?" I asked, curious rather than accusatory. "Everything," she said with a small laugh. "After you left, it was like a mirror had been held up to our lives. Jackson was devastated. The twins kept asking for you. I realized we had prioritized appearances over what really mattered. And for what? So some snobs would include us in their dinner parties." She went on to explain that they had made significant changes. Jackson had left his high-pressure finance job for a position with a company that valued work-life balance. They had sold their oversized house in Lakeside Estates and bought a more modest home in a friendly neighborhood. They were focusing on building real friendships rather than strategic social connections. "We are still figuring it out," she admitted. "But we are happier now. The twins certainly are." On their final evening, as the twins slept exhausted from a day of beach adventures, Jackson, Stephanie, and I sat around the fire pit on my small patio. The conversation turned to the future and what our relationship would look like going forward. Would you ever consider moving back? Jackson asked hesitantly. I looked out at the ocean, considering my answer carefully. No, I said finally. This is my home now. I have built something here that matters to me. Friends who accept me as I am. Work that gives me purpose. Peace that I fought hard to find. I could see the disappointment in his face, but also understanding. We will visit then, he said, as often as you will have us. And maybe someday when the twins are older, they could spend summers with you. I would like that very much, I told him, meaning it deeply. As they prepared to leave the next morning, loading their suitcases into the rental car, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Sadness at the impending separation, joy at the reconnection we had achieved, hope for the future of our relationship, and something else, something I had not expected. Pride in the boundaries I had established and maintained. In the past, I would have agreed to whatever Jackson wanted, eager to please, afraid of losing him again. But the man I had become during our year apart knew his own worth, knew that healthy relationships required mutual respect, not one-sided accommodation. The fact that Jackson seemed to accept and even admire this change in me suggested that his own growth was genuine. We said our goodbyes with tears, but also with plans. They would return in August for a longer stay. I would fly out for the twins' birthday in November. We would establish new traditions that honored our separate lives while creating space for connection. As their car disappeared down the coastal road, Frank appeared at my side, having come to see them off. Quite a journey you have been on, Cooper. He observed, his weathered face thoughtful. From losing your family to finding yourself to rebuilding those bridges. Still rebuilding, I corrected him. One plank at a time. That is how all good work gets done, he replied with the wisdom of a man who had seen his share of storms and reconstructions. Slowly, carefully, with the right tools. I nodded, recognizing the truth in his words. The pain of Jackson's rejection had nearly broken me. But in that breaking, I had found the courage to value myself apart from his approval. To build a life based on my own definition of worth rather than someone else's. And paradoxically, it was that very independence that had created the possibility of genuine reconciliation. As I walked back to my cabin, I thought about the many people watching this video who might be facing similar pain. The rejection by loved ones. The feeling of not being enough. The struggle to find worth in a world that often measures value by the wrong metrics. If you have found meaning in my story, I hope you will take a moment to like this video and subscribe to hear more journeys of healing and self-discovery. Drop a comment sharing your own experience with family relationships. Have you ever had to step away from someone you loved in order to find yourself? What helped you heal? Remember that sometimes the most painful chapters of our lives become the foundation for our greatest growth. That learning to value yourself is not selfish, but necessary. And that true dignity comes not from status or approval, but from living authentically according to your own deepest values. Thank you for accompanying me on this journey. Until next time, may you find the courage to be true to yourself, even when it means walking a lonely path for a while. The view from the other side is worth it.